The outlaw bikers who rode into open range uninvited. Red Canyon MC and owners who don't warn twice. The Red Canyon MC didn't have bylaws written down anywhere. They had Danny Ortega, 52, who'd been riding since before half the group was born, and they had the understanding that certain things didn't need to be said out loud. You didn't ride alone unless you had to. You didn't make decisions that affected the group without talking it through first. You kept your word, you showed up when called, and you didn't bring problems to the table that you couldn't help solve. 6 of them met every other Saturday at the Chevron off Highway 26, just east of the county line. Danny rode a '09 Road King with worn saddlebags and a quiet engine. Next to him was Russell Cobb, 48, who worked nights at the grain elevator and never missed a ride. Then came Marcus Flynn, 51, a truck driver with a temper he kept on a short leash. Leon Hayes, 46, owned a small HVAC business and talked more than the rest of them combined. There was Jimmy Ruiz, 43, who'd done 2 years in Pendleton for something he never discussed, and finally, Tom Beckett, 55, a retired sheriff's deputy who still carried himself like he was on duty. They didn't wear cuts, they didn't claim territory, they just rode. The route was always the same. East through the high desert, loop south near the mountains, then back before sunset. They stopped twice, once for fuel, once for food, and they never deviated unless weather forced them to. Danny set the pace, Russell rode sweep. Everyone else fell in between and stayed there. On the morning of August 17th, they met at the Chevron under a sky that looked like brushed steel. The temperature was already climbing. Danny checked his mirrors, nodded once, and pulled out onto the highway. The others followed in formation, engines low and steady, no conversation necessary. They'd been riding for 90 minutes when Danny took an exit that none of them recognized. Russell noticed first. He tapped his headset twice, the signal for what's going on, but Danny didn't respond. Marcus pulled up alongside Leon and pointed at the road ahead. Leon shrugged. They kept riding. The pavement turned to gravel, then to dirt. The landscape opened up into wide, rolling grassland with no houses, no fences, just cattle scattered across the horizon, and a single rusted gate hanging open on a post that leaned hard to the left. Danny slowed but didn't stop. He passed through the gate and kept going. Jimmy pulled up next to Tom and shouted over the wind, "You know where we are?" Tom shook his head. "Private land, maybe." "No signs." "Doesn't mean it's open." They rode another 3 miles before Danny finally pulled over near a dry creek bed, lined with scrub brush and red dirt. He cut the engine and climbed off, stretching his back without looking at anyone. Russell stopped next to him. "Want to tell us what that was about?" Danny pulled off his gloves and tucked them into his belt. "Shortcut. Through somebody's ranch. Gate was open. That doesn't make it ours to use." Danny looked at him for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the creek bed. The others exchanged glances but said nothing. They'd learned a long time ago that Danny didn't explain himself unless he had to. Leon climbed off his bike and stretched. Hell of a view, anyway. Marcus lit a cigarette and leaned against his handlebars. "Hope it's worth the ride back." Jimmy wandered over to the edge of the creek bed, hands in his pockets, looking at nothing in particular. Tom stayed on his bike, eyes scanning the hills in the distance. Russell walked over to Danny, who was standing near a patch of disturbed dirt where something had been dragged or turned over recently. "We good here?" Danny didn't answer right away. He crouched down and brushed at the dirt with one hand, revealing the edge of a canvas tarp, sun-bleached and stiff with age. "Danny, I see it." "Then let's leave it." Danny pulled the tarp back. Underneath was a tangle of rusted fence wire and a leather saddlebag, cracked and faded, with initials stamped into the flap. "J. Teak." Leon walked over, curious. "What did you find?" Danny didn't respond. He opened the saddlebag and pulled out a stack of documents wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were old property deeds, survey maps, and a series of black and white photographs showing fence lines and boundary markers. Marcus came closer, cigarette hanging from his lip. "What is that, somebody's estate papers?" "Older than that," Tom said, standing behind them now. He picked up one of the photographs. It showed 2 men standing on either side of a barbed wire fence, both holding rifles. "This is from the 70s, maybe earlier." Jimmy leaned in. "Who buries legal documents in the middle of nowhere?" Someone who doesn't want them found, Russell said quietly. Danny set the documents back in the saddlebag and closed it. He looked at each of them in turn. We put it back. We ride out. We don't talk about it. Agreed, Tom said immediately. Leon nodded. Marcus shrugged. Jimmy said nothing. Russell watched Danny's face. You sure that's all we do? Danny stood and brushed the dirt off his hands. That's all we do. But even as he said it, he could feel the weight of something shifting, something small and irreversible like a stone rolling downhill. They covered the saddlebag with the tarp and smoothed the dirt over it. They climbed back on their bikes and rode out the way they came, through the open gate and back onto the highway. No one spoke for the rest of the ride. When they reached the Chevron, they split up without making plans for the next Saturday. Danny rode home alone, thinking about the initials on that saddlebag and the way Tom had looked at those photographs, like he'd recognized something he didn't want to name. The road doesn't forgive, it only remembers. The following Saturday, Danny didn't show up at the Chevron. Russell arrived first, like always, and waited by the pump with his helmet under his arm. Leon pulled in 10 minutes later, then Marcus, then Tom. They stood in a loose circle, checking their phones, watching the highway, saying nothing. At 8:15, Jimmy arrived and killed his engine. Anyone hear from him? No, Russell said. He's sick? Didn't say. Leon walked to the edge of the lot and looked east as if Danny might appear any second. He's never missed a ride. There's a first time, Marcus said. Tom crossed his arms. Maybe we should call him. And say what? Russell asked. Where are you? We're worried. Something like that. Russell shook his head. He'll reach out if he needs to. They waited another 20 minutes. By 9 o'clock, it was clear Danny wasn't coming. So what do we do? Leon asked. Marcus flicked his cigarette into the dirt. We ride. Without him? You want to sit here all day? Leon looked at Russell. What do you think? Russell didn't answer right away. He was thinking about the way Danny had crouched over that saddlebag, the way his hands had moved slowly, deliberately, like he was handling something fragile. I think we ride, he said finally. Same route, same stops. They pulled out onto the highway in formation, but it felt wrong from the start. Russell took the lead, but he didn't have Danny's instincts. He rode too cautiously, checking his mirrors too often, second-guessing every turn. When they reached the exit Danny had taken the week before, Russell kept going. No one argued. They stopped for fuel in the same town they always did. Leon went inside for coffee. Marcus leaned against the wall and smoked. Tom sat on his bike and stared at his phone. Jimmy walked over to Russell. You think he went back? Back where? That ranch, that creek bed. Russell looked at him. Why would he do that? I don't know, but he's the one who found it. Maybe he's the one who can't let it go. Danny's not stupid. Didn't say he was. They rode the rest of the route in silence. When they got back to the Chevron, they split up without making plans. No one suggested meeting the following week. On Monday, Russell stopped by Danny's house. It was a small place on the edge of town, a single-story ranch with peeling paint and a carport full of bike parts. Danny's Road King was parked in the driveway, covered with a tarp. Russell knocked twice, no answer. He tried the door, locked. He walked around to the back and looked through the kitchen window. The sink was full of dishes. A coffee cup sat on the counter, half full. Everything looked normal. He knocked on the back door, still nothing. Russell stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, trying to decide if this was the kind of thing you pushed or the kind you let go. He let it go. On Wednesday, Tom got a call from someone he hadn't spoken to in 6 years. The voice on the other end was familiar but strained. Tom Beckett? Yeah, who's this? Ray Kern? Tom sat up straighter. Ray Kern was a rancher who owned 15,000 acres east of the county line. Tom had worked a vandalism case on Kern's property back when he was still a deputy. The investigation had gone nowhere, but the memory of Ray Kern's cold, flat stare had stayed with him. What can I do for you, Ray? You still ride with that group, Red Canyon? Tom's chest tightened. Sometimes. Why? One of you came back. Back where? My land. Saturday before last, then again on Monday. Tom didn't say anything. I don't mind people crossing if they ask first, Ray continued. But I mind when they start digging. Digging? Near the old creek bed, someone pulled up a tarp and didn't bother covering it back right. I want to know what they were looking for. I don't know what you're talking about. Then find out. Because the next time someone crosses my fence without permission, I won't be making phone calls. The line went dead. Tom sat there for a long time staring at his phone. Then he called Russell. They met at a diner off the highway, just the two of them. Tom told Russell about the call. Russell told Tom about Danny's house. You think he went back? Russell asked. Kern said someone did. Could have been anyone. Could have been Danny. Russell rubbed his face. What do we do? We talk to him. And if he doesn't want to talk? Tom looked out the window at the empty parking lot. Then we decide if we're willing to ride with someone who doesn't follow the code. Russell didn't respond. They finished their coffee in silence and left without making a plan. That night, Leon called Marcus. You hear from Danny? No. Tom? No, why? Just wondering. Marcus could hear something in Leon's voice, something tight and uncertain. You all right? Yeah, just feels like something's off, you know? It's off because Danny's not around. Maybe. What else would it be? Leon didn't answer. Leon, I'm fine, forget I called. The line went dead. Marcus sat in his kitchen staring at his phone, thinking about the way Danny had looked at those documents like they meant something, like they mattered. He thought about the way Tom had studied those photographs. He thought about the way Russell had said, we put it back like it was the only option. And he wondered if any of them had actually done that. Danny Ortega sat in his truck on the side of a dirt road 3 miles from the Kern Ranch boundary. Engine off, windows down, waiting for the sun to drop below the ridgeline. He'd been coming back for 9 days. Not every day. Just the days when he couldn't sleep, when the weight of those initials, J-Tick, pressed against his chest like a hand. He'd done his research, county records, old newspaper archives, birth and death certificates going back 50 years. James Theodore Kern, born 1931, died 1979. Listed cause, accidental drowning. Father of Raymond Kern, current owner of the land. Danny had found 3 articles about a boundary dispute between the Kern family and a neighboring rancher named Holland. The dispute had lasted 8 years, involved 2 lawsuits, and ended abruptly in 1979 when James Kern disappeared during a flash flood. His body was found 2 weeks later 8 miles downstream. The case was closed, no foul play suspected. But those documents in the saddlebag told a different story. Survey maps with hand-drawn corrections, deeds with signatures that didn't match county records, photographs of fence lines that had been moved, then moved again. Danny had made copies before he returned the originals. He told himself he was protecting the group, that if anyone came asking questions, he'd be the only one who knew anything. He'd be the firewall. But he knew that wasn't true. He'd gone back because he couldn't leave it alone. Because something about those documents felt like a door left open, and he couldn't stop himself from walking through it. Now he sat in his truck waiting, knowing that Ray Kern had cameras on the property, knowing that sooner or later someone would come asking what he was doing out here. He didn't care. He reached into the glove box and pulled out the photographs. In one of them, James Kern stood next to a barbed wire fence with a surveyor's marker in his hand. The marker read, Section 14, Township 7S, Range 22E. Danny had checked. That section didn't belong to the Kerns anymore. It had been quietly sold off in 1981, 2 years after James died. Sold to a shell company that no longer existed. The land had changed hands 4 times since then. No one seemed to know or care about the original dispute. Except Danny. He folded the photographs and put them back in the glove box. Then he started the truck and drove home. On Thursday morning, Russell received a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Russell stared at the message for a long time. Then he called the number. Danny answered on the first ring. You alone? Yeah. Meet me at the Overlook, 1 hour. Danny. The line went dead. The Overlook was a pullout on Highway 26 with a view of the valley below. Russell arrived first and waited with his arms crossed, watching the road. Danny pulled up 20 minutes later in his truck. He climbed out slowly like a man who hadn't slept in days. Russell didn't move. Where have you been? Around. That's not an answer. Danny leaned against the hood of his truck. I went back. I know. How? Ray Kern called Tom. Said someone's been digging on his property. Danny's jaw tightened. What did Tom tell him? That he didn't know what Kern was talking about. Good. Is it? Russell stepped closer. Because from where I'm standing, you just put all of us in a bad spot. I didn't use your names. You didn't have to. We were all there, we all saw what you found. Danny looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his truck and pulled out a folder. He handed it to Russell. Inside were copies of the documents, the photographs, and a handwritten timeline Danny had pieced together. Russell flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with each one. What is this? Proof, Danny said. That James Kern was trying to steal land from his neighbor, that he moved boundary markers, forged deeds, and got caught, that someone buried the evidence after he died. And you think that's our problem? I think it's the truth. The truth doesn't pay our bills, Danny. It doesn't keep us out of jail. It doesn't protect the people we care about. Danny's voice went quiet. So we just walk away? Yes. Even if it means someone got away with murder? Russell froze. What are you talking about? James Kern didn't drown by accident. He was killed. And whoever did it buried the proof in that saddlebag so no one would ever find it. You don't know that. I know enough. Russell closed the folder and handed it back. Then you know enough to leave it alone. I can't. Yes, you can. You just won't. Danny looked away toward the valley, toward the horizon. Someone has to. Russell shook his head slowly. Not you, not us. Then who? I don't know. But it's not our job to fix something that happened 40 years ago. Danny didn't respond. Russell turned and walked back to his bike. He climbed on, started the engine, and looked at Danny one last time. You keep going down this road. You're going alone. He rode off without waiting for a reply. That night, Danny sat at his kitchen table with the folder open in front of him. He thought about calling the sheriff, about handing over the documents and walking away clean. But he knew how that would go. They'd ask where he found them, they'd ask why he went back, they'd ask who else was there. And then the questions would spread. To Russell, to Tom, to Marcus, Leon, and Jimmy. They'd all be pulled in, questioned, investigated. The group would fracture, not because of what they'd done, but because of what Danny couldn't let go. He closed the folder. He thought about burning it. Instead, he put it in a safe in his closet and locked it. Then he poured himself a drink and sat in the dark, knowing that the decision had already been made. Not by him, but by the moment he'd pulled back that tarp. The road doesn't forgive, it only remembers. Ray Kern found Danny's truck parked on the access road at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. The driver's side door was open. The keys were in the ignition, the engine was cold. Danny was sitting on the tailgate, hands folded in his lap, staring at the sunrise like he'd been waiting for someone. Ray pulled up alongside him and cut the engine. He climbed out slowly, a rifle resting in the crook of his arm. Not aimed, just present. You've been busy, Ray said. Danny didn't look at him. I came to talk. Little late for that. Maybe. Ray walked closer, boots crunching on gravel. You went through my property without permission, twice. You disturbed something that wasn't yours to disturb. And now you're sitting here like you've got a right to be. I found your father's saddlebag. Ray stopped. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, something small and dangerous. Say that again. James Theodore Kern, your father. I found his saddlebag buried near the creek bed. Inside were documents, survey maps, deeds, photographs. Ray's grip tightened on the rifle. Where are they now? Safe. That's not an answer. Danny finally looked at him. Your father was trying to steal land from the Holland family. He moved boundary markers, forged signatures, and when he got caught, someone buried the evidence. I want to know who. Ray's face remained expressionless. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. I don't owe you an explanation. You owe someone. Ray raised the rifle, not pointed at Danny, but lifted enough to make the threat clear. Get off my land. Danny didn't move. Your father didn't drown by accident. Get off my land. Someone killed him, and you know who. Ray's finger moved to the trigger guard. His voice dropped to something flat and final. Last warning. Danny stood slowly, hands visible. No sudden movements. He walked to his truck, climbed in, and started the engine. He looked at Ray one more time through the open window. I made copies, Danny said. If something happens to me, they go to the sheriff. Ray didn't respond. Danny drove away, checking his mirrors every few seconds, expecting to see the rifle come up, expecting to hear the shot. It never came. That afternoon, Tom Beckett received a visit at his house. Two men in plain clothes, federal badges, polite but direct. They asked if he knew Danny Ortega. They asked if he'd ridden with him recently. They asked if he'd been on the Kern property in the last month. Tom answered carefully. Yes, he knew Danny. Yes, they rode together sometimes. No, he hadn't been on the Kern property. The men nodded, wrote notes, and left without explaining why they were asking. Tom called Russell the moment they were gone. We've got a problem. Russell called an emergency meeting at the diner. Everyone showed up except Danny. Tom told them about the federal agents. Marcus told them he'd been followed that morning by a truck with government plates. Leon said his business had been visited by someone asking questions about his schedule. Jimmy sat quietly listening, his face unreadable. This is Danny's fault, Marcus said. He went back. He stirred things up. Now we're all exposed. We don't know that, Leon said. What else would it be? Tom leaned forward. The question isn't what Danny did. The question is what we do now. We distance ourselves, Marcus said immediately. We tell anyone who asks that we rode with him a few times, but we're not close. We don't know what he's been doing. Russell shook his head. That's not the code. The code doesn't apply when someone breaks it first. Danny didn't break anything. He found something and he tried to do the right thing. The right thing? Marcus's voice rose. The right thing was to leave it alone, we all agreed, and he didn't listen. Because he couldn't, Russell said quietly. You saw his face. You saw the way he looked at those documents. He couldn't let it go. That's his problem, not ours. Tom cut in. It became ours the moment we rode through that gate. The table went silent. Jimmy finally spoke. What if he's right? Everyone turned to look at him. What if James Kern really was murdered? What if the people who did it are still around? What if Danny's the only one willing to find out? Then he's a fool, Marcus said. Or the only one with a spine. Marcus stood up. I'm done. I'm not riding with any of you until this blows over. And if anyone asks, I don't know Danny Ortega anymore. He walked out. Leon hesitated, then followed. Tom looked at Russell and Jimmy. What about you two? Russell didn't answer right away. He was thinking about the way Danny had said, someone has to, like it was a responsibility, not a choice. I'm staying out of it, Russell said finally, but I'm not turning my back on him. Tom nodded. Fair enough. Jimmy stood and put on his jacket. I'm going to find him. Why? Because someone should. He left without waiting for a response. Danny Ortega disappeared 3 days later. His truck was found abandoned on a Forest Service road 40 miles from the Kern Ranch. The keys were missing. His phone was on the seat, battery dead. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no evidence of foul play. The sheriff's department opened an investigation. Federal agents interviewed everyone in the Red Canyon MC. Ray Kern was questioned and released. The case went cold within a month. Russell stopped riding. Tom moved to Idaho. Marcus got a job in another state. Leon closed his business and disappeared. Jimmy kept looking. He drove the back roads, talked to ranchers, visited the places Danny had been. He didn't find anything. But he didn't stop looking. 6 months later, Russell received a package in the mail. No return address, no note. Inside was a single photograph. James Kern standing next to a barbed wire fence, a surveyor's marker in his hand. On the back, written in Danny's handwriting. The road doesn't forgive. Russell stared at it for a long time. Then he burned it. Russell Cobb sold his Road King in October. He didn't tell anyone, didn't post it online. Just called a dealer 2 towns over and took whatever they offered. The bike was gone by noon. He told himself it was practical. Gas was expensive. Maintenance was a hassle. He didn't ride anymore anyway. But the truth was simpler. Every time he looked at it, he saw Danny crouched in the dirt, pulling back that tarp. Tom Beckett lasted 3 more months before he left Idaho and moved to Washington. He found work as a security consultant, a job that kept him indoors, away from open roads and long silences. He didn't talk about the Red Canyon MC. When people asked if he rode, he said he used to and left it at that. At night, when he couldn't sleep, he thought about the phone call from Ray Kern. The way Kern's voice had been calm, measured, like a man who'd already made his decision and was simply informing Tom of the outcome. Tom had wanted to warn Danny. He hadn't. And that was the thing he couldn't shake. Not the discovery, not the consequence, but the moment when he'd chosen silence over loyalty and told himself it was the smart choice. Marcus Flynn moved to Nevada and took a job driving long-haul trucks. He worked alone, slept in rest stops, and avoided conversations that went deeper than weather or route conditions. He didn't think about Danny often, but when he did, it was always the same image. Danny standing at that creek bed holding those documents like they were something sacred. Marcus had thought it was obsession. Now he wondered if it was just honesty, the kind that cost more than most people were willing to pay. Leon Hayes reopened his HVAC business in a different town under a different name. He worked 12-hour days, kept his head down, and made a point of never talking about his past. He didn't ride anymore. Didn't even look at motorcycles when he passed them on the road. He told himself he'd moved on, but every few months he'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking about the way the group had fallen apart. Not because of what they'd found, but because of what they'd each decided to do with it. Leon had chosen comfort over courage. He knew that. And knowing it didn't make it easier, Jimmy Ruiz kept looking. Not every day, not even every week. But when the restlessness came, when the silence in his apartment felt too heavy and the walls too close, he'd climb on his bike and ride east, toward the places Danny had been. He talked to ranchers who remembered James Kern. He studied old property records. He walked the fence lines and photographed the boundary markers. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he couldn't stop looking. One afternoon, 2 years after Danny disappeared, Jimmy found himself standing at the creek bed where it had all started. The tarp was gone. The saddlebag was gone. The dirt had been smoothed over like nothing had ever been there. Jimmy stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, staring at the red earth. He thought about calling Russell, about trying to pull the group back together. But he knew it wouldn't work. The group had dissolved the moment they'd ridden through that gate. Not because they'd found something, but because they'd each carried it differently. Danny had carried it like a burden. Russell had carried it like a warning. Tom had carried it like a threat. Marcus had carried it like a mistake. Leon had carried it like a secret. And Jimmy had carried it like a question that would never be answered. In the years that followed, the story became something else. People in town talked about the biker who'd gone missing. Some said he'd been killed. Others said he'd run off. A few said he was still out there, living off the grid, hiding from something no one could name. The truth was simpler and harder to accept. Danny Ortega had found something he couldn't ignore, and it had cost him everything. Not because he was wrong, but because he'd been the only one willing to carry the weight of being right. The group had fractured not because of betrayal, but because they'd each chosen survival over solidarity. And the road had remembered. Russell thought about Danny every time he saw a motorcycle on the highway. Tom thought about him every time someone asked about his past. Marcus thought about him in the long, empty hours between hauls. Leon thought about him when he locked up his shop at night and drove home alone. Jimmy thought about him every time he rode east chasing a ghost he'd never find. None of them ever spoke to each other again. Not because they were angry, but because some silences are louder than anything you could say. 3 years after Danny disappeared, Jimmy received a letter. No return address. Postmarked from a town he'd never heard of. Inside was a single photograph. 6 motorcycles parked at the chevron, engines off. Riders standing in a circle like they were deciding something important. On the back, in handwriting that wasn't Danny's, "The road doesn't forgive, it only remembers." Jimmy stared at it for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his wallet, next to a photograph of the group from better days. He climbed on his bike and rode east, toward the places where the answers used to be. He didn't find Danny, but he kept riding anyway, because some roads you don't travel to reach a destination. You travel them because stopping means admitting you should have done something different, and that's a truth too heavy to carry standing still.